Okay, we're live. I'm really grateful for Claire and Tariq to be here. Claire, the secular Quranist, whose idea is about promoting prostitution, amongst her many interesting, great ideas, I would say, in some ways. Uh, and I have agreed with many of her other ideas that seem ludicrous to other people, like promoting slavery. So let's see how this one goes. Tariq has been looking into the verse of the Quran that Claire's been referring to, and seeing if there's any basis to this prostitution idea. And what was the other thing? Prostitution and what was it begin with C?
Concubine contracts?
Concubine contract. Okay, so Claire's gonna try to sell it for 5 minutes. I'm gonna do my 30-second sell of this. There's a lot of sexlessness amongst the youth, and that's not healthy. People need to have their fair share of sex. I'm not joking. This is serious. Too much testosterone in the youth is dangerous. They'll do dangerous things with that extra energy, and they're going to be pretty annoyed. It's a basic need. So I appreciate trying out all sorts of unusual ideas to try to solve this. Claire, tell me about this idea of yours, and why it's important, and all that kind of stuff. 5 minutes, go for it.
Prostitution is an institution like marriage and slavery. And institutions are practices or bargains between different parties that will be eternally occurring. So we all know that not everybody is capable of being married, but men still want to have sex. And where can they get sex from? If not their wives, obviously prostitutes, because they can't be having sex with um, women they're not married to, of respectable backgrounds, because it will mean what we have now, which is basically single, never married mothers all over the place, and creating a situation where people don't even think it's a problem not to marry before having children. And now, since they are the majority, it's going to be a very difficult way, a task to say, look, you're all supposed to be married before you have children. And Islam is just the strongest way to make that message clear. And that's why I get so much resistance. I don't think it's the other stuff. It's basically men and women saying, "Oh, but we enjoy our sexual liberation. We enjoy this sort of sexual equality because under the liberal order, it is permissible to have sex with another consenting adult, be it a member of your own sex or family members, because, as long as they're over 18, it's all right, as long as you don't get pregnant. And if you do get pregnant, you can get an abortion on the NHS. And this kind of free for all attitude has caused all kinds of social problems and a lot of bad parenting and degeneracy and the decline and fall of the West. And it affects us, non-whites who live in the West, because, we've settled here, we've got children here, and whatever hurts the white man also hurts us. And therefore, we have to regulate who can have sex with whom. And the rules have to be very clear. And obviously, for women, the higher status sex provider is the wife, and the lower status sex provider is the prostitute. And in between could be the concubine, which is a kind of girlfriend contract. And I believe what the concubine is basically lower status than the wife, but her children will not be treated as illegitimate. So the position is clear, and I think it's simple enough for even the most dim-witted people to work out. And this is how I propose to rearrange the furniture of people's minds to have a higher standard of sexual morality in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for presenting that so clearly. People might be wondering, if they're new to the show, this series, what's this got to do with Islam? Why talk about Islam at all? Because in short, Islam has been solving most social problems. If we're looking at it, we've got in, let's say, just looking at the UK, you've got the most people with the most stable families, having the most children, solving everything that's going wrong in the West. So Islam seems to be fixing everything. So let's see if Islam can fix this for um, the population, the Western population, for people who can't quite get married, because we've been doing marriage classes. Maybe it's just some people can't get married, and maybe there's some solution. So Tariq, a good friend of mine, who's been reading into the Quran and ideas that Claire's pointed out in the Quran that she suggests might be somehow Islamic. We'd like to present for 15 minutes, and then we're gonna open it, open the floor to the public and myself, and just you don't have to be bothered about what if it's Islamic or not. It's just the point is that is there something that Islam has to offer here? That's the short what I'm trying to say. That could help society. So Tariq, go for it. 15 minutes.
Cool. I'm going to share my screen. Right. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And it's 19:08. Yeah. So I guess 15 minutes takes me up to.
Yeah, I won't shut you down if you're a bit off time. Just roughly.
Yeah. Okay. So for Muslims, the Holy Quran is the complete and absolute word of God. That means what God has legislated in the Holy Quran is to be followed. That means that there's an incumbency upon believers to understand what has come in the Holy Quran. Now, with regards to marital contracts, there's quite a lot of information. I just want to deal with the prostitution element of it first. So I heard what Claire said. She said there's a hierarchy of sex providers, wives, concubinage, and prostitution. I think for a lot of people would combine concubinage and prostitution. So, but that's something that Claire's providing in terms of what she calls the mental architecture for us to work through. Maybe I will differ from her in certain usage of terminology, so people who are listening to this might have to work out what I'm trying to say and what she's trying to say. But let's just deal with the idea that Islam allows for women to be compelled into selling sex, or to be in a position where they are providing sex outside of a normal marriage contract. Yeah. So the Quran says here, and this is Surah An-Nisa, I believe. Yeah. So the fourth Surah: O ye who believe, it is not lawful for you to inherit women against their will, nor should you detain them wrongfully. And the history to this verse is that there was a particular hypocrite. His name is Abdullah ibn Ubay, according to the books of history, who had two slave girls. And I'm going to come back to this word slave quite a lot in this discussion. And he used these ladies to obtain an income for himself by forcing them to sexually service various clients. And so this verse was revealed as a prohibition of that practice. And then it was pointed out that pimping effectively was entirely forbidden. And of course, with prostitution and with concubinage, at least the way that Abdullah ibn Ubay was practicing it, there is a sense of compulsion, or there is a sense of force. So this is entirely forbidden within the Holy Quran. Now, the Holy Quran has two, I'm going to call them two tiers of marriage. And I'm going to pick my words carefully, and I'm going to ask people who listen to what I have to say to try and understand, not in modern day terms, specific words that I will use. So if I use the word concubine, if I use the word slave, I don't want people to wrap their idea around what their modern conception of this is. I want people to try and work with me to understand what I'm semantically discussing, because none of the words are appropriate, and I'll come to this. The Quran has what I'm going to call two tiers of marriage. One is the tier of free men with free women, which I think is very comprehensible to all. The Quran has a second tier, which gets very, very, very confused for people who don't understand the arrangement of um, how that architecture of relationships used to work, and then they ascribe words like concubinage or slavery to it, and that becomes very confusing, because when you have ideas of slavery, for example, slavery tends to mean, in lay English conception, that you have a master with full power and full autonomy over a person who is nothing more than chattel and can be beaten and can be sold and can be treated um, as if they have no effective worth. You know? And so this whole arrangement, yeah, becomes very confusing at all. And it's not just confusing for non-Muslims, because many Muslims don't practice Islam in a very diligent way, and they don't study the Quran in a very diligent way. Many Muslims have walked away with great ideas of confusion with regards to what this second tier of marriage actually is. Yeah? So the first tier of marriage, just to recap very quickly, a man can marry another lady. Such a relationship always, of course, has to be consented into. It is announced in a mosque through a contract called the nikah contract. A man can have up to 4 of these marriages, but each one of them is in its own right a nuclear family, and there are various rights that accrue to the wife and the children. There are various obligations that accrue to the man as a result of that relationship. That's quite a standard arrangement, and that's conceptually very clear to everybody. Right? In addition, the Quran also has a specific provision for ma malakat aymanukum, which are ladies who the right hand possesses. You know? And I'm just going to go to a verse in the Quran. If you just bear with me, let's see, it might be on the next few pages. Here we go. This verse, yeah. وَالْمُحْسَنَاتُ مِنْ نِسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُم. And forbidden to you, the forbidden to you is in italics here because it comes from the previous verse, are married women except such as your right hand possesses. And this phrase, except what your right hand possesses, is the cause of considerable controversy, and it's misapplied continuously. So the Muslims who have associated themselves with ISIS in Iraq within recent years took Yazidi women, Yazidi ladies, and made them sex slaves, and justified, so this is 2015, 2016 that we're talking about, and justified their abhorrent practice of forcing these women to service them sexually under a Quranic provision. And there was an entirely horrific distortion of the Quranic scripture. That's one set of views. 2, yeah. I have heard Arabs tell me, practicing Arab Muslims tell me, that this refers to modern day prostitutes, that they can turn into kind of long-term sex workers to service them sexually without quite elevating them to the status of a wife. That's another distortion. The reason why these distortions exist is because this is not an applicable provision in today's society. Ma malakati manukum, those who your right hand possess, are people who have been captured in war. Not just ladies, males as well, who have been opposing the Islamic State, and they've been opposing the Islamic State by way of hostility and aggression, such that the Islamic State has had to fight a defensive war, because every war in Islam properly is a defensive war, and that's another conversation. The opposing party has lost. The opposing party has men and women who are hostile and inimical to the Islamic state. And then you have the immediate question of how to distribute such individuals within society. So it's not a sexual question at its core. It's not a sexual question at all. It's just a question of how to manage such individuals who have been captured. Now, I'm just going to go to something on a Word document. I'll see in the 5. Can I have a small extension, Khalid? Because I might not finish quite by 7:23.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because there's a lot
We might
to get
fight in if it takes a bit longer, but we wouldn't. Let's see how it goes.
It's quite a complex arrangement, and I'm always very nervous when we start talking about this, because people bring their own ideas to it, and I just have to quickly, and I'll try and do this succinctly and
But just to
efficiently.
summarize, all you're saying is, so far, according to your interpretation, is that these people your right hand possesses the Quran is talking about, where you might have these, let's say, sexual slaves or concubines, whatever you want to call them. They only seem to happen in the scenario where there's an aggressive party or aggressive somebody who wants to take you as slave. That's really important. Like, you don't you don't do that to everybody. Only people who really want to attack your country and make your women slaves and make your men slaves and stuff like that, you have to reciprocate. And then whatever. That's roughly what you're saying so far, yeah?
Yeah, and in fact, let's go to a verse in the Quran on that right now. Yeah, right. So sometimes when people read the Quran, they read the English, they don't really understand it because they're very lost in all of the complex dynamics. So you have to really pull it up. There's a verse in the Quran: "It does not behove a prophet that he should have captives until he engages in regular fighting in the land." Yeah, what does that actually mean? You can't go and do slave raiding parties just to find a stock of slaves. Yeah, and whether the word slave is appropriate, we'll come back to in a second. Anyway, yeah, right. But just work with me. This ma malakat aymanukum, you cannot have a regular pool of people that you just go out and you just seize, as the English seized the West Africans. Yeah, there has to be a war. They have to have had attacked you. Yeah, you have to get to the end of that war. You have to be a victor in that war, in a just war that you fought, and then you have the problem of people. Then you have to work out how to distribute people who have been hostile to Islam, and you obviously cannot allow such people to gather again and form another army against Islam. Yeah, so it's a distribution problem, right? And why can you not do these slave raiding parties? It says it in the next sentence. You desire the goods of this world. You might like people to service you, etc. Yeah, but God desires for you the hereafter. That you cannot strip people of their liberty willy nilly, just because you want a pool of people to service you. Yeah. So the idea of this ma malakat aymanukum, which is very badly translated as slaves, and sometimes in more modern parlance, sometimes it's translated now as prisoners of war, which might be more appropriate, but it doesn't it won't capture all of the nuances of it. But let's work with prisoner of war. Yeah, you can have prisoners of war to service individual families, yeah, whose punishment, yeah, punishment in inverted commas, but it is punitive, yeah, is to be distributed as servants to different households. Why? Yeah, because you don't have a prison service, because that has a demand of resource in many societies. Yeah, right. And so therefore, one way that early Islam came up to deal with this is to allocate these to the houses of the different soldiers. Yeah. So that's what ma malakat imanukum, male or female. Yeah. That's what that comes from. Right. Now, in the Quran, yeah, and I can get the reference out later. I might not have it to hand. In the Quran, it very clearly and expressly says that for all of these ma malakat imanukum, you have to treat them with a particular quality called ihsan. This is in Surah An-Nisa. Yeah, we discussed this a couple of weeks ago. It means kindness. Yeah, and when you treat somebody with kindness, yeah, how aggressive is that? You've obviously taken from them their liberty, but you've taken from them their liberty because they came and they fought a war with you. Yep, and you were defending yourselves, and then as a punishment, you had to strip them of their liberty because you can't allow them just to reform an army again. Yeah, but then you've got this problem where you've got to distribute all of the individuals, and it's not just ladies. It isn't just ladies at all. It's very clear in the Quran. It's also men. I can find plenty of references to show that you distribute them to individual households. Then you're told you have to treat them with kindness. Yeah. So this idea that you have subservient slaves who you can behave with as you wish is entirely rejected by the Quran. Now I see I've reached 7:23. Let me try and speed up and go through various other bits quickly because I do wish to come to the idea of ladies and concubinage. Yeah, right.
Sure.
So,
I mean, Claire, do you want to say something, or are you okay with Tarek carrying on as he is?
Perfectly happy with Tarek carrying on.
okay. Right. So. Let me try and deal with the termination, yeah, of how somebody can leave this arrangement, yeah, right. Let me also deal with the sexual side before I deal with termination. But before I deal with both the termination and the sexual side, let me just show you, yeah, several traditions of kind treatment, yeah, and I'm just going to go through the ones that are highlighted here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Yeah, you can read them as I talk through. So Bukhari,
you'll send this to me later on and put it in the description so people can check it all out. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah. In fact, do you know what? I'll send it to you when Claire starts speaking. And my apologies, I was rushing around this weekend. So
sure, that's all right.
I kind of did this last minute, but. Okay, so people know the word Bukhari because Bukhari is the most famous book of hadith. It's called the Sahih. But the Imam Bukhari actually wrote another book. Yeah, he wrote another book called Al Adab al Mufrad, which means singularly wonderful etiquette. Yeah, right, which is a whole book about the etiquette of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, and he gathered how Muslims should behave based on how the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God, behaved. Now, this is a wonderful book. It's very well known by the scholars. Yeah, it's not of dubious provenance, but it tends not to be known by many of the common Muslims. Yeah. In it has it calls it its ninth book, yeah, but it's actually the ninth chapter because the books aren't really that long, and it has this book of ownership and mastership of these slaves, yeah, and it's full of how kind you have to be to to the slave. So I'll just go through one or two of these. Yeah, right. The last words of the prophet were, yeah, the prayer, and fear God concerning your slaves. Yeah, this is according to his son-in-law. Then his son-in-law also gives in this tradition here a whole story, a whole anecdote where he asks his son-in-law and his cousin also, incidentally, to bring him a page so that he could write for the Muslims instructions of being kind to these mamalakat imanukum, right? And by the way, I just went on sunnah.com and wrote mamalakat imanukum, right, to obtain and extract this information. Yeah, so I'm talking about what the Quran is talking about. Yeah, so this is men and women. Yeah, right. Of which obviously we'll come to women and what sexual relations you can have with them, and it goes on in some of the traditions that are here. You might think, well, they're not really related to slaves, but there was a reason why in Book 9, the Imam Bukhari put this in that specific book, yeah, about how to treat slaves, yeah, right. On the day of rising, retaliation will be taken from anyone who gives a beating. This is Imam Bukhari saying, if you beat your slaves, you will be liable. There's another tradition in here that if you hit a slave, yeah, man or woman, they should be freed. Yeah, it's quite well known. This this idea, this is excessive punishment, right? This idea, yeah, that and when we use the word slave, it's a really bad word in English, right? And that you're applying back to Islamic history. This idea that you can use this word slave, which connotes absolute power, absolute ownership, yeah, the worthlessness of the individual, right? Who is the purported slave? Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. I would propose, yeah.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there's the English usual usage of the word slave, and that does not apply to the treatment you're expected to give such people in Islam. So it's not a really good word. Like the kind treatment you have to give in Islam to people who are so-called slaves is nothing like what we envisage in the usual English language. That's what you're basically saying. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, look at the next tradition. Yeah, and then I'll move on to the sexual element of it. Right? You're not even allowed to say my slave. Yeah. Right. You should call them my boy or my girl, which of course in English and in every other language generally is a very kind and compassionate way of addressing them. So they might be prisoners of war. They might have come into your household because they have had hostility towards Islam, and that in itself, the stripping of their freedom is a punishment. But when they come into your household, you're supposed to have the very best practices with them. Yeah. So these are men and women, yeah, that we're talking about, right? Now let's come to the sexual element. I'm sorry to have taken so long to get to this point, but it's quite complex an arrangement, which is why it's taken me a little bit longer, and I'll try and be succinct here. So, from prophetic practice, it is known, yeah, that if there was, let's call them a prisoner of war servant lady, yeah, who was in a household, yeah, and the nation state with which there had been a war asked for their freedom, yeah, they could have their freedom if they paid a certain price. Yeah, one, right? If their family, yeah, asked for their freedom, again, they could have their freedom if they paid a certain price. Two, yeah, right. Three, if they themselves asked for their freedom, according to the Quran, and I'm just going to scroll down to an English translation of the Quran, yeah, they should have their freedom. Yeah, it's an obligation. And such as desire a deed of manumission here, a deed of manumission means a written document freeing them, in writing, from among those whom your right hand possesses, this is the class that we've said, write it for them. It's an obligation on the Muslims, if they are asked, to write a deed of freedom for them, according to Yeah, a measure of service that they can deliver. Yeah, so that maybe ensure that my chickens provide me 50 eggs. Yeah, but something reasonably liberal. Yeah, right. And then you will have your freedom, right? And this next portion is important. If you know any good in them. Yeah. Why, if you know any good in them, any is the word, by the way, right? If you know any good in them, if they have some element of goodness with in them, they can be rehabilitated. Such prisoners of war who are holding a grudge against Islam and the Islamic State and wish to destroy it from the insides and are not worthy of rehabilitation, you can hold potentially that back from them, that freedom. But otherwise, however trivial the service that they provide, if they ask for a deed of manumission and they can say, I can only do this much, you have to give it to them. Yeah.
Sure. So you have to be reasonable, but
Sorry?
also bear in mind. Yes. So there's two things there. You have to be
Yeah.
reasonable. You then make it difficult for people to be freed of their slavery, but also you have to remember this is a prison service, so you just don't let go people who are dangerous to society. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. That is what I'm saying. Yeah, and in fact, there's great merit, and I can show you from the Quran, but I don't want to do this. I don't want to go off into and take a long time in freeing slaves. Yeah, and the blessings that accrue. This word again, slaves that I'm using, words that accrue to slaves. So okay. So it is possible for anybody to seek their freedom from this arrangement, including women. Okay. Now here's the bit about the sexual arrangement. Yeah. So you have a servant, a lady who has lost her freedoms because she has entered into uh, a war against Islam. Remember, just as a side, women did come out and in those times, and they used to sing to their husbands um, to fight the Muslims, and used to rile them up and fire them up. Yeah, so women also did participate. Yeah, in the battles, even if they didn't participate in the front side of the war. So such a lady is now being punished and has been stripped of her freedom. She's coming to the household. She has to be treated with kindness because I've demonstrated that is the entire purport of the Quran. Yeah, she has chosen herself not to seek her own freedom. Nobody else wants her to be free. Her nation state doesn't want her to be free. Yeah. Her family doesn't want her to be free. They're not making any arrangements. Yeah. And you can't treat her badly. Yeah. But she is living in a male's household. Yeah. And she has softened. You can't force yourself on her because you can't treat her badly. That's obvious. We've covered that. Yeah. But she herself now wishes to develop a relationship with a Muslim male. Yeah. In whose household she is. How is that compulsion? Yeah, in a sense, that's only natural. Yeah, so it is potentially permissible for a Muslim head of the household to have a sexual relationship with such a lady. Yeah, this is not. Yeah, this is part of the distribution problem. Now, why is this? Sorry, there's one last element that I want to speak about, but yeah, please go on, and then I'll
No,
finish.
she won't be counted as a wife though.
Well, she will be counted as a second tier of wife.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So the first tier of wives you can only marry up to 4. Yeah. The minute, incidentally, and there's a whole legislation about this. The minute she gives birth to a child, she becomes one of those free women, and she rises to that higher status.
So there could be potentially 5 wives in that case, because if the man has used up his 4 wives, as it were, and then
Yeah. In fact, but this was a perversion of Islamic scripture. That's exactly what the kings used to try and have a harem. Yeah, and they had 300 wives. Yeah, they tried to say, oh well, these and there's a whole distortion about this verse. They said, oh well, they're Mamalik Managum. They don't need to be my wives. Yeah, but that's a distortion. But
that's
yes,
exactly.
it is possible to have more than more than 4. Incidentally, 2 other things. One thing I'll just deal with in a sentence, although it merits a lot more time. Yeah. And then another thing I'll go on to in more detail, and then I'll finish. The thing I'll deal with in a sentence, it says in the Quran that poor Muslim men who cannot afford who cannot afford to get married, yeah, the masters of believing slave women, and again, it's a horrible word. I'm just using it just semantically so you understand what I'm trying to say, but it's not really the appropriate word. The masters of such ladies should free them so that they can marry the poor Muslim women. So there's an encouragement of that. That deserves more time than I can give it here. But I'm just showing that there's continuously a pressure in Islam to try and free as many people as possible. Islam is not trying to hold on to this, and develop this idea of slavery in society or slave labor. The other thing that I think is really important, right? And I'll just need to go through this, yeah? In war, what happens to women from the other side, traditionally, up to modern day, yeah? Comfort women, which is a live issue today in Korea, still a live issue dating from the Second World War, were used by the Japanese imperial forces, who entered into a certain concubinage arrangement with Korean ladies. And that was so admittedly, I don't know the full details, but it was a very perverse relationship, as I understand, where there was a lot of wrong done on those Korean ladies, and it was just to service the Japanese as they were trying to push further and further into China. It remains a very hot topic in Japanese-Korean relations to this day. Yeah, but this is not a Far Eastern thing. Yeah, this is a thing about war. If I go into Vietnamese Americans, let me go to this. This is a Wikipedia entry, right? During the Vietnam War, a sex industry developed around American servicemen. Yeah, and it's estimated that the number of prostitutes was 300,000 to 500,000. It led naturally to a consequence which wasn't considered at the time, which was children being born to Vietnamese parents whose servicemen fathers had left. Yeah. In fact, it was actually covered in a recent movie by Spike Lee, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago. Yep. And then the Americans in the 80s at state level recognized that this was an issue, so they tried to, or they did. They offered repatriation to some of those Amero-Asian children. But those Amero-Asian children, if you read their life before their repatriation, it's very painful because they were rejected by society in Vietnam because they were the children apparently of the enemy, and the servicemen fathers had ignored them. So Islam is dealing with this distribution problem. Yeah, this is the mischief. It's a very sensible way of dealing with it.
Sure. So I can see that Islam's provided a very balanced way of dealing with a war situation. But what we're trying to deal with is a modern Western problem, nothing to do with war, just the sexlessness. And we're trying, I think, both me and Claire, we're trying to find a way for the modern white sexless man to get some sex because it's a need. Claire, that all what Tariq has said doesn't sound like it fits in with your idea. Although in some way I want your idea to somehow work, although I don't really like prostitution because it harms people mentally in terms of their sexual relationships. It's not good, but I feel like I wish there was something. Claire, do you want to ask Tariq something?
Well, it's very interesting to see how it worked historically, but I suppose what I'm doing is proposing that it be adopted in the future. So perhaps it would be helpful to know in our minds, what we mean by a concubine and what we mean by a prostitute. And I'm saying that the concubine is the, in the modern 21st century sense, would be a kind of girlfriend contract. So you would have a position where there is this contract between the man and the woman, and the man basically says, if you get pregnant, I will treat the birth of the child as marriage, so that the child will be legitimate, right? And that would be, the sort of cheaper form of marriage.
So instead of, this is interesting. So instead of a war being necessary, because this starts the idea that you have to have a war, an aggressive war, for this whole scenario to play out. Claire is suggesting people offer themselves into this sort of semi-slavery. Is that a possibility, Derek? Is that what you're suggesting, Claire? People offer themselves?
Yes, I'm saying, a lot of women who are in long-term relationships find it very difficult to get the man to commit to marriage, because once they cohabit with their man, the man will say, well, I don't need to marry you because I've got all I want. You're living with me, and, so there is this casual attitude towards marriage, saying it's just a piece of paper, we don't need it, and the man obviously knows that if he does marry her, he kind of may be risking his financial future in case she decides to divorce
So
him for
developing
no good
different
reason.
contracts, like not just a marriage contract, but for girlfriends, so they know where that relationship is going, or not even where it's going, but they have some sort of standing, isn't it? It's like they're
Yeah,
not
it's this
just.
kind of going steady contract, basically, because then you have these sort of standards of long-term relationship. It's like, oh, you've been going out with so and so for 3 months now. Do you think you'll continue, or
Well, it could be 10
oh,
years.
so you've been seeing him for 5 years now, and he hasn't even promised a concubine contract. What are you doing, wasting your time with this man? All kinds of things can be made of the situation.
So it's protecting women's rights in an interesting
And
way.
making them think about the kind of relationship they have. If some woman's been, in a relationship for, 7 years, and the man's refusing to marry her, and she's saying, well, how about it? How about if you want to think about, if you can't bear to think of marrying me, what about a going steady contract, which is basically what the concubine contract is? And if he says no, then she'll know to dump him, because she's obviously wasting time with him.
I suppose makes things black and white. Like if he doesn't
Yes.
accept the concubine contract, even though it might not sound great at the moment, then she knows that this relationship is going nowhere. He's taking no responsibility for anything. So that's useful in that sense. So I suppose there's two questions here. One, is it Islamic? And two, is this useful? We've got kind of given some reasons as to why.
There is a muta marriage, but that's by the Shias, and I've forgotten the term for the Sunnis. There's also something, but it's called a different name, which is not quite
Sure.
marriage.
So we
Maybe
could
you
go
know
into that
about it.
as well. That's an idea. The mutta marriage is what's the mutta means? Joyful marriage or a happy marriage?
Pleasure marriage.
Pleasure marriage, which basically means like prostitution, but calling it marriage. So by the way, if anybody wants to join, I put a link to the. If you want to join on the camera, you can. I put a link in the chat. So Derek, a question. Is it possible to volunteer yourself into that situation without having to have a war? Can you volunteer yourself as a sort of prostitute?
Yeah. So let me talk about the muta marriage as well, and I'm because I'm Ahmadi, I'm going to talk about the Sunni position, but I'll deal with it a little bit into the history of it. But just as your first answer, prostitution in the sense of women being forcefully
But not forced.
Yeah. That's clearly forbidden, right? I showed you that Quranic verse. Yeah,
sure.
Right. Yeah, right at the outside. That's clearly forbidden.
Okay.
But so in terms of the muta arrangement, so in the Jahiliyyah period.
Okay, you said force is forbidden, but I'm just saying if you volunteer yourself as a semi-slave, then that can't be forbidden, can it?
Yeah, which is, I guess is what I'm about to address now.
That's the mutual marriage,
Yeah,
volunteer one. Okay, cool.
yeah. So I guess that will fall into a different category, right? Although I'll still argue that it's not appropriate. But in this case, a lady and a man consent to have a relationship, and I believe in Shia fiqh, of which I'm not an expert. It's between 1 to 99 days. Yeah? And this existed as an arrangement between men and women in the Jahiliyyah period, in the pre-Islamic period, right? And I believe the Shia community say that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed it. Yeah? And they then say, therefore, he sanctified it. Umar, his successor, definitely forbade it. Yeah, right. And so from the Sunni position, yeah, it's forbidden. And Umar's argument, I believe, although I haven't looked at the sources for quite a while, was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have also forbidden it. Yeah, if he did even allow it ever, it was just an interim position. Yeah, so there's been this debate between Sunnis and Shias over this marriage for quite a long time. But of course, Sunnis sometimes have deviated from their own standards, I suppose. Yeah, and so it's crept back into some Sunnis. I believe.
What would be the short Quranic or Hadith saying the Prophet Muhammad edict? So basically, edict you said Umar, who was a Khalifa but not the Prophet, he says no. But what's in the Quran or something, or saying as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that says that kind of temporary marriage is not acceptable? You don't have to know the answers.
The thing is, what it does in the nikah, right, is it sets a time limit. So when you do the nikah right at the beginning, you have
the
a
marriage contract. People don't know.
Yeah, right. Which I can probably go and easily quite check what the what the verses of the nikah are, right? But I think the Sunni interpretation would be you cannot imply a time limit of expiry into those Quranic verses. Yeah. Whereas the Shia interpretation might be, no, this is a particular thing that can be implied in. Yeah. Right.
So it's a little bit tricky because I'm rushing you a little bit because I'm trying to get onto something as practical as possible for today. So so it's
that's the historic thing. So let's talk about the practical implications of it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So a lady enters into a relationship for 1 day, which I think is the smallest amount of unit. Yeah, that you can have. Yeah. How can you possibly know if she's going to be pregnant or not? Right.
You can't.
And then the child grows up, and he's already had. He's the product of a divorce that was conceived to be a divorce right at the beginning. So the child's rights have been affected right from the beginning. Yeah, you could essentially try and argue. Yeah, I'm just talking about it from practical perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's not very kind.
If it's 99 days, you could potentially argue. Well, there's a whole lengthier period of working out whether the lady.
Let me jump in there. So Claire, this idea of muta marriage, if this is a 1 day marriage, let's just start off with the 1 day version. Which contract would that fit into? The prostitute contract, according to your secular Quran idea, or is it the concubine contract? That's the first question. The second question is, do you see that if there's and what would happen to the baby? If there's a baby?
I actually don't agree with a muta marriage because the whole idea of marriage is that it is for legitimate children. So if you want to just have sex with a woman but not marry her, it's the other kind of contract. But if you're not sure, you want to take, you want there to be some sort of trial period. I mean, this is the concubine contract that I have in mind. It's like, yes, come and live with me, and if you have our child, it will be considered a marriage, and the child will not be illegitimate. So,
Okay.
so
And what
that
would
would
be
be
the
the deal.
prostitute contract?
The prostitute contract would be, the one-off hiring of sexual services, but then it's possible that some men want to hire a prostitute for a weekend, a holiday, whatever.
Yeah, and what would
So
happen
that
to
should,
the
in theory,
child?
be possible. But it would be short of a concubine contract, which is, because a long-term relationship is not being contemplated. But in theory, it could become a long-term. It
Sure,
could even
but
become
we're concerned
marriage.
about the child in. Could you have a child in a prostitute contract? I guess you can.
No,
So
because a man would say, "Well, I only paid you for your sexual services. I never intended to marry you." There is a difference.
sure.
These contracts are intended to protect the man as well as the
So they're
woman,
all very clear about what the rules are, and then
and what they're for.
and if a prostitute goes ahead and has a child, then
Chapter 24, verse 2, the 100 lashes thing would
she'll be
kick in.
considered adulterous because by having a child, she's giving evidence that she
She's
had sex
guilty of
outside marriage.
fornication. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's also giving evidence that the man also was a fornicator, and then he would get whipped as well, I guess.
Yes.
Sure.
But
So,
I mean, the man would say, well,
yeah.
so it's very important, this idea of licensed brothels in a red light district, because
Sure.
the whole idea is you kind of isolate this kind of activity in the sleazy part of town, so people get the idea that this is not ideal. So a woman would think, well, I don't want to be one of those
It's
women
not
looking. I
exactly
want to be a
promoted
wife.
then. Okay. All right. And Derek, you're just sort of a yes and no because we're kind of trying to keep it in time in a 1 hour slot. This prostitute idea where if a baby turns up and it was not really desired by the man and there was a contract to say you're not supposed to have a kid, otherwise you're going to get whipped. That's the deal. Is that in any way Islamic?
No. Absolutely not from my point of view.
This is more a secular Quranism idea. Okay. How do you feel about that, Claire? It's not Islamic, it's your idea, but you're trying to make something work.
Well, I mean, as far as I know, no Islamic country actually has a red light district, does it?
No,
But
no,
that's
it
not
does.
what I'm arguing for.
Unfortunately, it does.
Well, but the thing is, there is this verse that
So
says,
she means an official red light district, not like there are lots of red light districts everywhere, Dubai, Jordan, wherever you go, right? But they're not official, promoted, and they're
yes,
not like.
I should have said licensed brothels.
Yeah, and what she means is like the brothels are kept clean and the
And they
prostitutes are
pay
made
tax, and the government, says it's okay.
and make sure
That's
the
what I mean.
prostitutes don't have STDs, maybe, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, they'd have to. I mean, the whole idea of a brothel is that you look after your girls, because you can imagine. I mean, going back to Tariq's thing, you capture your slave girl. Maybe she works as a prostitute. I mean, you can't ask her to walk the streets because she'll just run away. So you have to put her in a, provide her with a safe working environment, or she'll just run away. So,
I mean, this seems sort of a kind of kindness. Tariq, is there any scope of that kind of kindness in Islam? Or you can't really.
No. I think there's no. So I raised the child problem, but I think the other problem is, when sex starts being something that becomes transacted for, impliedly this ends up being very complex dynamics of pressures and powers. You have lots of unfortunately, you have lots of pornographic actresses who come out at the end of their career and say, actually, throughout our career, even though they were, selling the service as it were, who come out and say, actually, we felt compelled throughout our whole year, our whole career. So I think the minute that you start transacting for sex like that, you have this whole conversation about power really resides. Yeah, and of course the idea that a man pays money, yeah, and gets a service that's very reductive. Oh, sorry, I say of course. To me, that's extremely reductive, and it ignores all of the different elements, even psychological, uh, that go into that arrangement.
So what you're saying is, in theory, it sounds nice, that we're going to take care of these prostitutes, but in reality, it's a slippery slope. And actually, because women are weak, it's very easy to start taking advantage of them. Would you agree with this? That's what you're trying to say. It's a slippery slope. It sounds nice.
It's a slippery slope. I would accept that.
Okay, Claire, what do you think? It's a slippery slope,
Well,
and you can't really
I think
control it.
women might say, I was forced into this marriage, but actually nobody was holding a gun to their head. They were probably nagged to death by their parents, like, what's wrong with you? Nobody's going to marry you if you wait any longer. And reluctantly she marries, this person. I mean, going to work. I mean, how willingly do we go to work? We just contemplate the alternative of not being able to pay our bills, to make us go to work. So I think unless somebody was actually threatening to beat her or whatever, you have to accept that they do have free will, and if nobody, if she can't prove duress and coercion, then she willingly entered into the marriage or what whatever she was doing. I think that should always be the rule.
So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So there's women. Are you saying women can't prove that they're being coerced, therefore they weren't coerced? What are you saying?
Yes, because if you're going to say I was forced into this thing, then they'd have to provide evidence. Not, I was scared, I didn't know. It would have to be, have to be evidence, because otherwise everybody would be saying, oh, a gun was held to my head, and I was
Sure.
scared, and
Yeah, but as a state, we kind of want to provide the best conditions for all citizens to make everybody happy. And there's all sorts of issues, not just the slippery slope of abuse of women, but does it really work for, like, just having transactional sex, even from a man's point of view? That's really bad psychologically. It's just like indulging in porn. It's bad for relationships between men and women. Direct?
Yeah, well, if I can come back to a broader point, with which I agree with both of you, yeah, a broader point. So I don't agree with the details on this. The sexlessness of society, yeah, I think both of you are very correct. Yeah, is a great concern. And when we say sexlessness, obviously there's an abundance of apps, etc., to get people into relationships, etc., and have quick one night stands, consensual, etc. But from what I'm observing is that long-term relationships don't ensue because people have too many artificial expectations, yeah, and so they're not willing to give a little bit of sacrifice because just from a man's perspective, a lady may be fatter than he wishes for because he has his crude ideas of what he should be satisfied with from maybe a lady's perspective. But now, I'm only giving certain trends. I'm not saying this captures everything. Sometimes a man might be earning an amount which she feels is not appropriate. Yeah. And people aren't willing now to enter into. I've noticed this just generally in society. People aren't willing to give up a little, to sacrifice a little, and this is a huge problem. Yeah. So I actually applaud the fact that you guys are trying to solve this issue. I totally disagree with the proposed solution. Yeah, but I recognize the problem as well. Yeah.
So you kind of pointed to some solutions as well. What you're saying is people need to have some give and take. And I think the higher level problem is not understanding why they should get married in the first place, because people don't. If you don't understand why you should get married, you're not going to bother with give and take and persist with marriage. You'd be like, forget this, not fun enough or something. So we do want to round up. I don't like keeping the guests longer than we promised. So Claire, solution, do some sort of roundup idea. What do you think is a solution? We'll go round. Start with Claire, then I'll go. I like going clockwise, then Thoric at the end. Yeah. So Claire, solutions. You can keep
The idea of this prostitution, concubine, marriage thing is to address the problem of free love, which is a very Western idea. Why shouldn't we have sex with whoever we like if nobody is being harmed? The idea of the victimless crime, and when the harm is being seen in all kinds of social problems, people just deny that it is a problem. So this sort of making men pay for sex thing is addresses the problem of free love. It's like men must never get sex for free, or they'll harm they will be sexually corrupted by the women who give them free sex, and their civilization will decline and fall, as has been happening.
So, as Derek said, and I appreciate the fact that we're trying to solve a very important problem. I think most people would appreciate, who seem to know what's happening in society. This is a massive problem, really big problem. There's going to be a lot of frustrated men if we don't solve this problem. So, what is the solution? It's marriage itself, and it's women understanding and men understanding it. And the reason I point that out is because people are putting artificial barriers to marriage. They're saying we've got to have really expensive weddings. Even in Muslim countries where I am, women are expecting a lot of things, and a lot of men are not getting married, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. So, understanding marriage, being humble, not putting artificial barriers to marriage, and knowing the benefits of marriage as well. You get more sex, by the way, if you're married than having one night stands. It's statistically true. Way more sex because you don't have to keep hunting for it. And then there's so much more you could say, like what's the value of marriage and that, but developing a family, all these subtle things are really important. So I suppose that's what I'll say now. Derek, what do you want to add to sort of end the conversation?
If I just finish with a Quranic phrase, they, ladies, are a garment for you, and you, men, are a garment for those ladies. Marriage is conceived of under Islam as a protection, where just as clothes protect us from the heat, the cold, the wet, the rain, etc., so men and women protect each other, and so there's something holistic to be sought there. And then I was very just concerned about this idea, or as an ongoing, not in this conversation specifically, this whole idea of ma malakat imanukum, it is totally misunderstood, misapplied across, as I put it out, the contemporary modern Islamic
the whole thing about right hand possessors, possession.
Yeah. And in a sense, it's very difficult to translate. So I've tried to explain a little bit about what the true rights and responsibilities are within that arrangement.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that you've done a lot of research, and I know you're incredibly busy, so value your time in the show as well as preparing for the show. I always appreciate you, Claire, as well. I think you come up with some really challenging ideas, not just for the fun of it, but to solve real life problems. So I appreciate that. And I think we'll end it for that. Appreciate everybody watching. Add your comments and things like that if you want, and we'll try to respond. Claire, is that all right? Should we end it there?
Yes. Thank you for considering my ideas. I mean, it is really to, make the contract clearer, and also I think my way of doing things would not make sex unaffordable suddenly. It's, I'm sure, these days a lot of women don't think that much of this sort of thing, anyway, because of their OnlyFans accounts, and, which is kind of, prostitution, but, at one remove. So, the purpose of prostitution, I think, is to kind of keep the peace, because I think war and revolution is caused by sexually frustrated men. And obviously men behave differently once they're married. Married men are more peaceful, I would say, than bachelors looking for sex. So I think the institution of prostitution has this particular social purpose in keeping the peace.
Interesting theories. All right. Thank you very much. Peace be upon you. Salam, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.